All right, we're going to keep rolling with early numeracy skills, and now we're going to talk about number identification. So, instructional strategies that are evidence-based or research-based for teaching number identification are constant time delay, simultaneous prompting, and model lead tests. Could you use system of least prompts? Absolutely, you could use system of least prompts. Here's our learning trajectory. With number identification, although your student may only be learning the numbers one or two because we always are individualizing, we typically start with a number identifying the numbers 1 through 5. Then we move to 0 to 10, 1 to 15, and then 1 to 25. Always making, 1 to 20, always making sure we individualize and scaffold that based on the needs of our students. After that, you need to determine, can you move to 40, 1 to 40, or do you need to stick with 1 to 25? That's up to you and your students' needs. So when you're teaching number identification, typically you're going to start by having, or what the way we start is by having the numerals in order when we have students identify those numerals. So we would start with them in our sequential order from 1 to 4 as an example. And then you would have the student, if we were having them respond receptively, we would say touch 4. Once they have mastered number identification in order, then we are going to present the numerals in a scattered format. Again, you can see how the rigor and the difficulty of the skill increases once you move them into a scattered format. What we're going to do now is we're going to watch, I believe she's a student, and this is not a student from our university, it's from YouTube. And she is using constant time delay to teach number identification for the numbers 1 to 3. Now, I do want to make a point, not that she didn't do a good job, she does do a good job, but there is one mistake that I saw her make, and she changes her prompt. She changes her prompt. So she changes from modeling by touching the number that is in her 0 second delay round. But then when she moves to her X second delay round, she taps it. And those are not the same prompt. So I'm not sure what the controlling prompt is, but she changes in between the 0 second and the X second. So just to be aware of that. However, she does a really good job with the rest of her delivery, with her reinforcement, with her error correction. So make sure you keep an eye out for all of those things, okay? So let's watch number identification taught using constant time delay.
Today our skill is going to be identifying numbers. Our first task is constant time delay. Are you ready, Sarah? Yes. Touch 1. Yes, 1. Touch 2. Yes, 2. Touch 2. Yes, 2. Touch 3. Yes,
That's
3.
our X second.
Touch 1. Touch 1. Yes, 1.
Error,
Touch 3.
no response.
Yes, 3. Touch 2. Touch 2. Yes, 2. Touch 3. Yes, 3. That was constant time delay.
All right. And you also saw at the end, this is going to happen to you. As she was doing constant time delay, she almost went back to that 0 second time delay. You saw her start to move her hand forward. Well, because she did that, she gave that student a hint, didn't she? She gave that student a hint at what the correct response was. So if I were teaching that or I was assessing that student, I was teaching using constant time delay, and that happened, I would just note that I made a prompting error on that trial, and I would go through that trial again. I would do it one more time. But otherwise, she did a really good job of her implementation. Notice how quick it was, how efficient, and it's a very effective teaching strategy. All right, so next, whatever number it is, but look at your paper to see. I want you to do a try and apply where you have a student you're teaching to identify numerals. And so what you're going to do is to teach your partner to expressively and receptively identify numerals using constant time delay. So you just saw what it looks like receptively. If you were doing it expressively, you would show the student a number, show them a number, and you would say, what number? And then your 0 second is going to be, you're going to tell them. So if I have a three, imagine a three is here, I would say, what number? Three. And then the student says three. And then I would show them the next one. What number? Six. Then the student says six. So that's your 0 second delay round. And then your X delay round, we'll do a 3 second delay round on this. So the other one was 0 seconds. This will be our 3 second. What number? One, two, three, three. Yes, that's the number three. Next one. What number? One, two, three. They say five. Four. What number? Four. They say four. Yes, that's the number four. Next time. What number? One, two, three. There's no response. Seven. Oh, I put a gesture in there. Don't do that. Seven. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. You're going to do expressively and then receptively, you're going to have them do touch. So touch four. Now, I do want to note that expressively, I gave an example of someone responding expressively verbally, but you could also have them do it expressively with an AAC device or sign language, for example. All right, make sure you do that and then write it down so that you hit all of them for your document that you turn in for your participation. All right, next we're moving to our next skill in early numeracy, which is making sets. And that's really understanding that you can combine objects and that creates a set. So if I put this group of objects together, that's a set of four, for example. And so instructional strategies that are EBTs or research-based practices are system of least prompts, model lead test, and simultaneous prompting. Again, you could use constant time delay. I'm not telling you these are the only ones that you could use. And our steps that we typically teach are we teach making sets up to three, then making sets up to five, and then making sets up to 10. And so when you're teaching making sets, here's an example where you could have, this is just like a little center activity where you give the student a number and then they create the set. This one looks like it might have something to do, let's say, with maybe caterpillars that have laid an egg. I don't know. It could be Jack and the Beanstalk, and those are beans. And then here is another one. And so for this activity, you have a card turned over, they flip the card, they make it the number using a tens frame, and then they build it using cubes. Now, I know that you're going to look at that tens frame and say, what is going on with that tens frame? So tens frames are used differently by different people. And for this teacher must have been teaching students to subbatize, and that's why she has 4 and 3. Because for some students looking at 4 and 3, it's easy to see without counting that that's 7. If I were teaching this, I would have done 5 in a row and then 2, because that is how we typically use a 10 frame. And then I would teach my students to be able to see that's 5 at the top and anything other underneath is above 5. So that would be 7. Again, just examples of some activities you can use. So now, surprise, surprise, I'm going to get you to do a try and apply where you are making sets and you are going to teach your partner to make a set using the manipulatives that were listed on Canvas, and then the system of least prompts. In your prompting hierarchy is a verbal prompt, then a model, and then a physical assistance. So remember with this, you're not adding anything to it. A minute ago, I almost added a gestural prompt and I had to catch myself, right? So we're not going to add anything to it. And it's always a good time to practice ahead of time. I was making that up in my head as I go. But for this one, what you're going to do is we'll just use the example of this little center activity. Is that I might say to the student, and I'm not going through a whole instructional trial, but when you do yours, I encourage you to do the whole instructional trial. So, or maybe I'll just go ahead. All eyes on tie, all eyes on tie. All right, guess what we're going to be doing today, John? Today we are going to be making sets. Did you hear that? Yeah, today we're going to be making sets. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a number, and then I want you to make a set of goldfish that tells me what that number is, okay? So it depends on what your instruction is. And then I would say, make a set of 7. That's my task direction. Then I'm going to wait for an independent response. If the student gives me an independent response, I'm going to say, great job, way to go. You made a set of 7. If the student makes an error, I'm then going to come in with my model. When I do my model, I'm going to count them out. One, two, and making a set of seven. Three, four, five, six, seven. Then I'm pushing them back without saying anything because it's just a model. Now modeling is counting because we count when we're making a set. Push them out of the way. Don't say anything else, and then the student counts them out. If they make an error or they don't respond, then I'm going to provide physical assistance. I'm either going to go like under their wrist perhaps and then help move them to the goldfish and then slowly help move them over to putting it on the fish bowl. And then I'm going to slowly start to fade that out as quickly as I can. As always, if they make a correct response, we're going to provide them with positive reinforcement because we want that behavior to reoccur. And we know that when we positively reinforce behaviors, we are increasing the likelihood that they will reoccur. So in this one, you're going to again use the system of least prompts, go from a verbal prompt. So you need to try it once with a verbal prompt, then they need to not respond or make an error. I'm going to tell you, have them make a mistake. When you did your videos, overwhelmingly, people did not have the students make an error. They just had them not respond, which makes your instruction way easier. But that's not what happens. Students often make errors, even though we want to use errorless learning. So have your student make an error while you try this. All right, next early numeracy skill we're going to talk about is comparing quantity. And that's really being able to distinguish between quantities and telling the equivalence between sets. And you can do this two different ways. You can either look at them and be able to compare quantities visually. Can you compare quantities here visually without counting? Yeah. Or you can compare quantities by counting. So you can do them visually or by counting. Here are instructional strategies that are effective. Discrimination training. So, training a student to a specific stimulus and then rewarding correct responses to that stimulus and only correct responses. Using simultaneous prompting, model test, and system of least prompts. Now you can see, I'm telling you, you can teach anything, right? Look at all of these skills that you can teach using the instructional strategies that you already know, that you've learned so far. So the sequence of steps that we typically teach is first, you create equal sets. Then you have the student identify more, less, and same. You have to know more, less, and same before you can learn greater than, less than, and equal to. Then you're going to compare dots where it's just the dots or boats or cats or whatever it is that you want to have for your representation, your pictorial representation. And then it's not until after they can do all of those things that you have them compare numbers. So which one is greater, 10 or 4? Which one is less than, 4 or 3? Are these numbers greater than, less than, or equal to 4 and 4? It's not until you get through all of the other skills, because remember, we're building on one another. That is part of systematic instruction. So we are going to sequence those skills and follow them in that order. So here's just one example of how you can teach that comparison early on when we're working with students in early numeracy is if you have two different sets and you're having them compare sets and each of them is a different type of object, in this case it would be a different color, then what you can do is line them up on top of each other, having that one-to-one correspondence. And then the way I always taught it was one bird was like orange, orange bird, blue bird, orange bird, blue bird, orange bird, blue bird, orange bird, blue bird, orange bird. Oh no, that guy's up there by himself. So what does that mean? That means that this set has more. So that's just one way that you can work on that with your students. All right, next try and apply. Here we go. I don't know why this one pops up this way. You're going to work on comparing quantities. And what you're going to do is to teach your partner to identify the group with more, the one that has more. So you're going to need to use your manipulatives. And this time you're going to use simultaneous prompting. So you're going to test and then you're going to teach. So you're going to start with that daily probe and you're going to do, let's do 3 rounds at least. And so you're going to do, or 3 trials each. at least. So you're going to do which plate has more, and one of your plates will have more in it. Do 3 trials like that where you're assessing them. You are probing your student because we're using simultaneous prompting, teach, then test. And then afterwards, you're going to do your prompting, your teaching trials, and your task direction is which plate has more, and then your controlling prompt is to point and say, this plate has more. Remember, when you're doing that teaching trial with simultaneous prompting, you're in a 0-second delay. All right, how was that? How did it go? I can't wait to read your submissions, your participation submissions, to see how your try and applies went. So make sure that you've added enough detail that I get some idea about what happened, what went right, what went wrong, what kind of questions you have. If you have any questions about any of the skills we just covered, make sure that you make a note of them. Make sure that you email it to me. Make sure that you ask me in class or after class, because as always, questions are welcome anytime, because that is one of the ways we learn and grow. All right, I'll see you in the next video.